Hi, I'm Jennifer Carter, and thank you for joining me on a podcast for parents, teachers, and administrators. Today's conversation should be a good one, and I'm sure it's something on your mind. So let's get to it. So thanks so much for joining me on a conversation. So if you could just give me a little bit about your background, introduce yourself a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you. So my name is Alexis Shepherd, and I've been teaching for 9 years in the state of South Carolina, and I have taught grades 2, 4, and 6. So I'm elementary certified, and in my state, that means I'm eligible to teach grades 2 through 6. And so I've spent 4 years in second, 3 years in fourth, and then this is my second year in sixth grade. And sixth grade is probably my favorite. Just as far as where they are in terms of their development. I love being able to talk to the kids about becoming. I'm all about the personal development aspect of things. I'm an ELA teacher. I don't think that I mentioned that. And so I weave a lot of different things into that ELA content. I love the opportunity for integration in what it is that I do, and I do it a lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, for people who don't know, ELA is English Language Arts, and that's what I actually taught. I taught English. So tell me a little bit about what you do and about your background and how you ended up with your Instagram, because I found you on Instagram, and just give me a little bit of a background about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So around year 4 of my teaching career, I had a serious brush with burnout. And it took me a long time to even be able to identify, but it was just, I was in a grade level that was like a brand new team. And so we were restructuring all of the curriculum. I had a pretty big class that year compared to the numbers that we usually had at that school. And I really didn't have a lot of boundaries either. So, I was expected to sit on this committee. We were restructuring the curriculum, and I really at the time didn't have the wherewithal to, even approach my teammate and say, hey, what if we just restructure these, limited parts of the curriculum? But we were doing the whole thing across every subject area. Because when I taught fourth grade, it wasn't departmentalized. So it was every subject area that we were building units from scratch. And in the district that I worked in, we had a baseline to go off of as far as, we want you to teach this at this specific time during the year. But we didn't have a whole lot of materials and a lot of direction and guidance. So it was us sitting down with what materials we had and trying to figure it out. And that was really, really hard. And then on top of that, also I had been labeled that teacher at my school who was the regulator. So I
That's
also
the
had
worst. It's a compliment that is so loaded, and you're like,
right. That's the thing. You feel a little bit of pride in that, in a way where it's okay, yeah, because I know that there are certain behaviors I'm not going to experience in my classroom or in my interactions with those kids. But also it then gives people that license, or they take that liberty to be like, okay, here you go. And there's an overload, and they assume that because you can, that you have the capacity to. And I was one of those people that was pretty much just oh, this must be a huge compliment. And I did not even recognize that girl, just because you can do this doesn't mean that you actually have the mental bandwidth to take all of this on.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of that, combined with the curriculum stuff. And then I also had, sort of some issues with people on the administrative team. It was a lot, and I was miserable. But I also was well, yes, this is just par for the course. And so I stuck it out, and I ended up moving districts the next year. Well, that kind of staved off the burnout for another year. And then year 6, I had a great year as far as students go, but I began to become encumbered by the systemic issues and the red tape and the paperwork and the mask, having to, thinking about code switching, thinking about this idea with teachers where we feel like we have to be on. You know what I mean? Like I hear teachers say that all the time, like, I've got to be at school and I've got to be on. And just that feeling of, I just felt like I was in the box that I couldn't get out of.
Mm.
And so I tried to leave that year, which was around 2018, and nothing happened. I applied for a bunch of different jobs and I didn't get any of those opportunities. So I got really frustrated.
Mm.
And in my frustration, I created the AfroEducator just as a way to reach out to other teachers on social media and connect. I really never intended it to be a platform for anything. But I was invited to do a podcast in that fall of 2018 where someone wanted me to talk about self-care because he had seen that I had posted, a few little things about it on Twitter.
Mhm.
And when he sent me the questions to preview, and they were really all about self-care and why it's important and what my experience had been with, burnout and why it was important to me. Just like stuff, words spilled out. And I just found that I had this very passion for it because of my own experience. So the AfroEducator was created for me as a part of a way to save myself from
Mhm.
burnout. And
Mhm.
then it became in me saving myself, I was passionate about doing it for others because I knew that there were so many other educators who had similar stories to mine.
Mhm.
And, I there are parts of teaching, right, that I don't love, but I love it enough that I want to help other people. And I had this desire to help other people work through it and to try to help make this a sustainable profession because the way it currently exists, it's not something you can do for a long time unless there are parts of yourself that you are willing to sacrifice completely for a long time.
Mhm. And I think your experience is very common. It's sort of the common trajectory. And I remember being a fresh faced new teacher, and you go
Man.
trotting in with your new tote bag
Oh,
and your little pencils. And I had my grade slider and my lesson plan book, and I was like, I'm gonna do it. And then you have someone who's been there for 20 years who really knows their stuff and who is really passionate, and they're like, just wait a minute. Either you'll leave or you'll become me. And you're like,
yes.
no, I'll never do that. I'm always going to have my Sherpa.
Oh my gosh, listen, I feel so seen right now because that was me. Listen, I was that person when I came out of college. Okay, I'm gonna be honest, I was maybe a little overconfident, but I was very confident in having the capacity to be a great teacher. My first principal told me when he hired me, he was like, I don't have time for you to be new. I need you to be like at the 5-year vet level. And of course, me not recognizing how toxic that was, I was like, bet,
I got
got it. So, girl, I was in there with my fresh tote bag, fresh supplies, all the bitter teachers. I was like, I'm never gonna be you. Like, it's just, and you find ways to exempt yourself from that trajectory because you're so unaware of how the system, like, it does that to you. And so when you say that, I'm like, yes, that was me. I had been told, oh, this is tough, or I had run into that teacher that was like, "Oh, just wait." And in my mind, I was like, Psh,
You just bitter, you
yeah,
know. You don't
that's
know
me.
me.
That's that's me." And then listen, now now I feel like I am becoming that person where it's like, and I try hard to be very aware of my speech when I'm talking to like new or pre-service teachers because I do want them to be successful. But there's also like an element of realness that you want them to walk into the profession with. And so for me, I feel like it's not just about the horror stories. And I think that's
Mhm.
part of why I was so dismissive in college and early
Mhm.
on when I heard
Mhm.
them. It's about also saying, yes, there are horror stories, but there are also ways that you can think about mitigation strategies. I feel like at this point, every student teacher should have to take coursework when it comes to what this job can do to you emotionally, mentally,
Mhm.
etc., and make a plan because the thing is when burnout happened to me, I had no idea
Mhm.
what to do about it. Like
Mhm.
I just felt like you said it was a trajectory, it was par for the course, and guess that's that. But I think maybe my circumstances would have been different had I already developed a plan, like, oh, I'm going to talk to this person, or I'm going to do this, or even just having even if I didn't use that plan exactly, knowing that, like, okay, I've already thought about a step by step process as to
Mhm.
how I can begin to work out of this. Here's a baseline. Maybe I can adjust it in this way so that I can begin to pull myself out of this hole. I think we do a disservice to teachers, especially new teachers, when we tell them all the bad stuff. And then it's just kind of like, and that's teaching.
Yeah, but I think it's kind of a combination, right? I've been teaching a long time. I'm always surprising people when I say I started teaching in 1994, so I've been teaching a long time.
Yeah.
And I what I what might be helpful is if every school district had that teacher that's like, you're going to change, but they're still in it and they're still rocking it and they still like it, but they have a healthy dose of cynicism. Every school has a handful of those folks, and having the new teachers sit down with those teachers so
Hmm.
they can be real and tell you, this is what I did to overcome, because
Yeah.
that is the trajectory of the
Yeah.
profession.
Yeah.
This is what happened, but this is how I overcame it. These are strategies I used.
Mm.
And especially for teachers coming up, unfortunately, I don't know how old you are, but I'm just going to say younger people have this idea that they can create a life that's comfortable and balanced
Mm.
and
Mm.
preferential. Like, I don't want to do that, so I'm
Mm.
not going to. But
Mm.
that's not reality,
Right.
right? I mean, there's no job in the world where you're going to have a life where you're not going to have conflict, where you're
Hmm.
not going to be overburdened, where you're
Right.
not going to have people that you work with that you're like, ugh. And teaching, having that mentality going into
Hmm.
teaching, I think can cause catastrophic
Mm.
emotional damage, because you
Hmm.
go in and you think, what's wrong with me? As opposed to, oh, this is the ebb and flow of the profession.
Right.
You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah. I think that's a couple of things that you said. One being having the new teachers sit down with the veterans and that healthy dose of cynicism. I think that also is very poignant in terms of being able to understand, okay, and this is why I have this perspective. This has been my experience. And so when you hear me say, for example, X and Y, it is because I have experienced this X amount of times, or, this has been,
Mm.
like you said, the ebb and flow. I feel like having that, when I was a new teacher, and I'm 31, by the way, um, when I was a new teacher, would have helped me understand that it's not cynicism or bitterness just from
Yes.
nowhere, right? There are
Right.
experiences that
Right.
have shaped that, because for me, it was always about, like, oh, well, that's about you. Like, you for some reason are just a bitter person, and you don't think about the fact that that is a piece of that. And then also that concept of coming into the job expecting that it's going to be, like you said, preferential, and there's going to be this balance. The whole thing about balance is that it doesn't exist in any job. It's about, and I had a conversation with a friend recently about this. It's about knowing where to have the imbalance, because there are
Mhm.
going to be some areas, right, where, like, this week I've really got to give priority to this. So this is not going to get 100% of my time and attention. And then next week that might change, or next month that might change. So I think it's knowing that there's going to be imbalance, but
Mhm.
that's okay, because again, the ebb and flow, that's just how it works. But also knowing that, yes, there are always going to be those challenges, no matter what job you have, no matter where you go. Even people who are, I don't know, maybe frustrated less also often, or feel like, oh, I just absolutely adore my job. Every job has its warts and has its things about it that are like, come
Mhm.
on now. So I think, yeah, and I will say, I think that idea though did start with my generation, with the millennial generation, and I think it has proliferated to or through Gen Z as well. And you
Mhm.
see a lot of, people even younger than me who are convinced that they are able to have jobs that set up kind of this perfect idealized scenario where I'm going to have this much time to do this and I'm going to be able to do this and I can say no if it's not that. And I do think that that can be, like you said, catastrophic, because then when you get into a situation, it's like, but wait a minute, this ain't, this is not.
Yeah, you're like, wait a minute. Y'all didn't tell me that I was going to have to do this, or deal with this,
Right.
I mean, it really blindsides people.
It does. And I think in the way that we equip, I think that's what we have to equip people, including teachers, for, is that, like, this is going to happen. And even though I know that you're not 100% trusting me and that I say this is going to happen, let's talk about how you can work through this. Even though, again, you may not work through it the exact same way that we're talking about now, I think it's important to talk about it, because then when it does happen, right, you'll have that memory of, okay, we talked about this and I have a starting point. So yeah, I think all of that is very timely.
Hey there. If you've gotten this far into the episode, chances are that you really like what you're listening. I'm going to ask you to press pause and share this particular episode with 5 people that you think would really enjoy listening to it. I'm also going to ask that you subscribe to our podcast so that you don't miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening. And now let's get back to the conversation. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. I hear, especially among Black people, we talk about our ancestors and being true to our ancestors and, finding our voice. And we have this reverence for older people, but we don't necessarily make it practical, where we find old people, no matter how cranky they are, or matter how bitter they are, and say, what's your experience? Because you are a living ancestor. I don't have to wait till you're dead. I can ask you right now.
Right.
And I encourage new teachers all the time to just sit and listen. People who've been in the profession, maybe 10 years, 15 and 20. So you can, and to be honest, the only thing that's different about when I started teaching and what it is now is that there's social media and people are like, oh my God, it's ruining it. I grew up in the 90s in the middle of the crack era.
Right.
You're going to try to convince me that wasn't just as bad, if not worse, where people were, I don't remember ever going to a party in my adolescence and there's not a fight or gunshot. So, it's not like anything is new.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, so you can tap into the knowledge of other people and see how they got through some of what we're just calling it different names. Like we talk about trauma, we talk about systemic injustices and systemic issues, and that has been around forever. We want to identify those people to help us navigate around it. And talk to people like you who have like different ways to cope with it that may be healthier.
Yeah.
I know a lot of administrators, and I have to say, many people have a nice adult beverage at the end of the night.
Okay.
That's a healthy way. I don't think that's a long-term strategy.
No, not long-term. Every now and again, though.
But every night, you have to get a scotch with a big piece of ice. I don't know if that's the idea that we want.
No. Not, again, at least not long-term, right? That's band-aiding the solution.
So what kinds of things do you suggest or approaches that you have found to be really beneficial for people?
So I would say the very first thing is talking about that performative piece of being on and off, right? So that was one of the things that was the most frustrating to me when I tried to leave several years ago was, okay, feeling like I am, going and getting on this Disney stage every day is really taxing. And so the first part of that was my decision to, and it was sort of like consciously unconscious, but to not fully code switch and to bring more of who I am outside of the classroom into the classroom. And it's, I feel like I need to be really specific here because I know some people think code switch and they think, oh, but that's just like you being professional. That's professionalism.
I don't know if
I mean,
there's an asterisk by people may think that. I know what
right.
you mean. But why don't you explain it for people who don't?
Code switching, on the other hand, is more, at least in my developed mind, assimilative, where you are trying to sort of match the norms of the people that you're with. So for me, I'm in a mostly white rural area. And I have kind of two primary demographics. One is like rural, white, impoverished, and the other is more like still rural, but more well-to-do, because we also have a lake here and we have a lot of people that retire in this area, young families who, have money, who live on the lake. So anyway, but it's a mostly white community. And so code switching would be using more of their language, terms that they understand, colloquialisms that they're familiar with, music that they hear every day. And so I decided to like cut all of that. And again, this was a consciously unconscious choice. I just knew that I couldn't continue to feel performative. So the first thing that I did was bring more of what some people might call my Blackness into the classroom, which included music that I like that is also appropriate for my students. I do when we talk about theme in the fall, we study Marvin Gaye's The Ecology album, and they listen to most of the songs off of the album. They find the theme of each one, and then we find the theme of the album as a whole, and they have to retitle the album based on the theme. And they fall in love with Marvin Gaye and with the message in his music. Yeah. And so bringing things like that into the classroom, slang that like I use every day. Again, as is appropriate, right? To me, that's where the professionalism comes in, but using slang that I use every day, or even with language. So I am an English teacher, but I am not a language police when it comes to the casual and informal ways that I talk to my students or that they talk to one another. But we talk about the power of language and how, when we don't code switch, because I even talk about this concept with my white students, people may take the way that you speak and interpret it a certain way and try to make judgments about you. So we talk about what are some times when you feel like that might be appropriate or when you want to do that. But we also talk about how that intersects with identity. So for me, it was being more of my true self and showing up as more of my essential self. So that kind of eliminated that performative aspect of things. And for the most part, it's not like a 100%, I've just thrown all caution to the wind. But when I show up to work and you see me and you interact with me, and then when you interact with me outside of work, you're getting very, very, very similar, very similar things, as opposed to before, where it would be very different. And then the second, I think, big piece, speaking still kind of on that performative line, was really zoning in on what my style was, what my thing was, what my teaching values were, and sticking to that. Because listen, when I was in college, that is when, Ron Clark really rose to a lot of prominence and was in the news, Ron Clark Academy. And everyone loves Ron Clark Academy. I've been to the Ron Clark Academy. I've had the experience. It was incredible. But what I found was that me and a lot of the people that graduated with me were trying to be this way because media, right? And even social media, I think it was just like, oh, this is so successful. This is what kids respond to. This is how kids connect and relate. So, when I came out of school, I was writing songs. I was rapping. I was dancing. I was
Oh my goodness. No,
coming up.
Look,
I'm saying. And so, I was doing all of these things, and I'm not saying, don't try new things, don't branch out. But I really didn't have a clear sense of who I was as a teacher and what I brought to the table. It was more about what can I do to appear to be a good teacher, as opposed to who am I that makes me a good teacher and what do I value. So, I'm a talker, in case y'all can't tell. And I love to have conversation. That's like my number one way to connect with people. Like we could sit and me and you have this conversation for a ridiculous amount of time.
I suspect that that's very true because I'm also.
I love that. So when I got in trouble in school, like it was for talking.
Yeah.
but I found that I never saw that as an asset,
Mm,
right? But around that time, this same time period when after I had tried to leave the classroom, I just remember the times that I felt my best and the times that I felt most connected to my students and they felt most connected to me is when we were just having conversations. And that's really when I started to lean into this part of myself where it's like, this is my thing. Like my thing is not the cute PowerPoints. My thing is not the dancing and the singing. My thing is talking to my students and just connecting with them on that
mm,
very real, very authentic, very
mhm,
raw,
mhm,
simplistic way.
mm.
And I never saw that as a teaching strategy, let alone an effective teaching strategy, something
It
that can
really
work.
is.
But it really is. And they love it. They soak it up. They eat it up. And when I tell you, I'll pull up my little teacher chair sometimes and we'll have what I call life chats where, we're just vibing. And so I think that recognizing that was actually something that was an asset, something that was an effective thing that I could do with my students that didn't require me to be someone else and
Mm.
to rely on all of these outside strategies. So I would say those are the top two things that sort of refreshed and rejuvenated me and made me feel like, okay, you got this. And then the third thing, and I would say of the three kind of big things, was boundaries and just really giving my time to those things that I was most passionate about and that were most valuable to me. Because we know that in schools, sometimes people ask you to do things and they're thinking, oh, I think so and so would be really good at that. And just because you would be good at something doesn't mean that you have to do it or that you're passionate about it. And for me, if I'm not going to be able to give quality time
Right.
and I'm not going to be able to serve this committee or do this task with fidelity, I'm going to say no to it. And it's not just about me, although it does benefit me. It's also about, you probably don't want that.
Right.
I wouldn't want to give that kind of product to you. And I certainly wouldn't want someone else to do that to me.
Mm.
So, it was a lot of inner stuff for me at first, and then really starting hardcore that journey with the boundaries.
But it's really interesting. Everything that you're talking about is you. It has nothing to do with changing the school. It has nothing to do with like changing the curriculum or your students. It really is about getting to a place where you do that authentic self-assessment. What am I going to bring of me so I'm not wearing myself out every day? You know, how can I be authentic and kind of do my thing and come up with my thing? And then how can I just do the things I'm really good at? You
Mhm.
know, and that's, I think you have hit the golden, not ticket because it's three things, but like you definitely have tapped into some really the most important thing is knowing yourself,
Mhm.
knowing what you're capable of and what you're not capable of.
Mhm.
Um, and unfortunately, because teachers tend to be smarty pants, we think we're good at everything,
Yeah, but we're
but
not.
we're not. I mean, this I tell people this all the time. I am really bright. I catch on to things really well. I can pick up a lot of stuff. I cannot photocopy for the life of me. I cannot. Every time I try to make photocopies that are more than like three or four of them, I mess it up every time. And I think I got so frustrated with myself. Like it's been some time ago, and I just realized I'm just not good at this.
Right.
But it also triggered like, wait, there's other stuff you're not good at. Why are you trying to do the stuff you're not good at? Do the stuff you're good at, and then you'll be good at the stuff you're doing.
Right.
Um,
Absolutely.
and but that's sometimes so hard because a certain kind of person is a good teacher, and that person has that confidence and is really smart. And so it's hard to admit when it's like that level of vulnerability with yourself
Yeah.
and other people also, which may be
Yeah.
for folks.
Yeah. I think too, And when we talk about like good teachers, I think also there's this notion, I talk about this on Instagram a lot. There's this notion of what it takes to be a good teacher.
Mm.
And a lot of times, our idea of what it takes to be a good teacher, we never look at ourselves and think off top, oh, I'm a good teacher. You think about all of these layers of things you have to do or be or appear as. And I think that's problematic as well, because you go into your classroom or you go into these educational spaces, and there's like this list of things you feel like you have to check off in order to be identified as that. Even though I was confident in my ability to be a good teacher when I started teaching, I mean, it may have been recently, like within the last couple of years, that I've started to look in the mirror and say, you know what? You're a good teacher, or to not dismiss someone when they would say something or try to, when people give you compliments, minimize what you do and your impact and your influence on students.
Mm.
So I think that's a part of it too, is reframing that narrative about who a good teacher is and what it takes to be a good teacher. My question is always, well, why aren't you a good teacher? What is it about you? And do you know that most of the time when people answer that question, it's all related to like tasks. Well, I don't get, I don't get my grading done in time, or, I didn't get to meet with this many students for conferencing, or it rarely has to do with what impact they're making on their students. It's all task oriented.
Well, maybe that's the starting point, that we need to change the question. Those of us who are teachers, we can say, what can I do to help students the most? Right? And you sort of take the whole responsibility completely off of yourself and say, what do I have that I can give them?
Yes.
Make it simple.
Yes. Yes. I love that so much. What do I have that I can give them? I love that, because it's what do I have, not what can I do? It's what's already there that I can sort of push out. And I think that's the most important part of it. But there's also that element where we have to be okay with that, right? Like it took me 6 or 7 years before I was even okay being like, talking is enough. You don't have to have all of that extra. So I think there's also that too, where you have to get to that point where you're willing to accept, and you have the capacity to accept that, even in that simplistic sort of view, because to me, that's the answer to all the questions right there, is what do I have, to offer? What can I do that will, most benefit or most help or most impact my students? What do I have?
Yeah.
But some people don't think that that's enough. And I wish that there was more work done around that. Right now, my question is, how do we make everybody think this way?
Well, you and I are doing it, right? You have your Instagram, I have my podcast. And
absolutely. Thank you so much. I have so enjoyed this conversation. You dropped so many gems, so many nuggets. I'm one of those people. I love to, in that connection, I love to listen and learn, and I internalize a lot of things. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, because honey, y'all can't see me, but I started to run a praise lap.
Well, thank you. It's been a delight. And like I said, your students are so, and I just have to say, a Black woman in what you describe, they are lucky to have you. And I know a lot of people don't realize that. And maybe you don't even realize that, but they are so lucky to have you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. That it does help to remember that. My mom has even shared with me on the hard day. She's like, you may be one of the only Black people that some of your students ever have a close personal relationship with, and the way that will influence the way that they view and treat and think about other Black people and other just people of color, people who are not like them, because this is a very homogenous community, will matter. So thank you so much for that. I appreciate that.
All right. Well, like I said, if ever you want to get in touch again, you have my email, and I would be more than willing to talk.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
So that's our conversation for today. I hope you found some information that was interesting or a perspective that you hadn't thought of. If you like what you heard, or even if you have some feedback, put a comment in our comment section. Be sure to like our page and make sure that you subscribe so that you can hear when the next video comes out. Thanks so much again for joining us.